Hello again, this is Miss C. We are moving on to the second part of our Macbeth story time today. And we left off last video with Macbeth and Duncan and Banquo all reunited after the battle had been won, after Macbeth and Banquo had met the witches, after they'd both been given some prophecies, and obviously the most important prophecy that Macbeth was given was that he was going to be king hereafter. So the two prophecies before that have now come true. He knows he is Thane of Glamis, he was already. He knows now that he has been made Thane of Cawdor. He's now having a little sneaky think to himself that king prophecy might have a bit more truth in it than he originally thought. So we are going to move straight on. If you want any more clarification about the first four scenes, you can watch the first video. But we are going to move places now. We're going to move over to the Macbeth's home, the Macbeth's castle. And we meet a new person at this point, okay? Who we meet now is Lady Macbeth, all right? And Lady Macbeth is a fascinating character for lots of different reasons, actually. She is a character who I feel is sometimes misinterpreted or sort of misunderstood, because as we continue to go through this scene, hopefully that will come clear to you. But I want you to sort of be asking yourselves as we meet this woman, the one basic question really: if you're evil, really evil, like she's kind of said to be, do you need help to be evil? Right? So we'll come on to that in a second, but that's kind of the philosophical question I'd like to think about. So we meet Lady Macbeth. She's reading the letter that her husband has written to her, letting her know all about the experiences with the witches, okay, what happened and what they told him. And he sort of tells her to keep it to herself and sort of he'll see her soon. So he's on his way back to her, but he's not back yet. And that gives Lady Macbeth a little bit of time to have a think about what she has been told by him. And also it gives Shakespeare some time to really develop that character of Lady Macbeth before we sort of see how she interacts with her husband. So as soon as she reads this letter, the really interesting thing to note is she doesn't have any sort of confusion about what the witch has said. In her mind, the witch is saying that he's going to be king means that he is going to be king because he kills the king at the moment, all right? Not he has to wait to, for something to happen to Duncan on his own or whatever else. No, in her mind, him being told that means that he is going to have to kill the king. And she is all for that. She is well happy with that, okay? The only issue is she thinks that Macbeth isn't evil enough to do this thing. She thinks that he is too full of the milk of human kindness, okay? He's too pure, he's too good. He's too much of a nice guy to catch the nearest way, as she says. So that's fine, because she feels that she's got more than it takes to do what needs to be done. So she decides very, very quickly that she is going to manipulate him. She is going to make sure that she chastises with the valour of her tongue anything that's going to stop him from wanting to do this terrible thing. All right, she's going to pour her spirits into his ears. She is going to really, really get into his brain to make sure he realises that this is the only thing that he has to do. Like, this is the only likely option. All right, got to be done, got to be done. So she has her first sort of big famous soliloquy in this scene as well. So once she sort of talked about the fact that Macbeth is too good and too nice to do what needs to be done, she then decides that she needs some help from the evil spirits. She needs to call on the evil spirits that tend on mortal thoughts to come along and fill her with direst cruelty, okay? To really, really make sure that she is going to be able to do what needs to be done. Now, this is what I said about this philosophical question of, if you're evil, do you need help to be evil? Because ultimately what she does is she calls on these spirits to make her evil, okay? To fill her with cruelty, to block up the access and passage to remorse. Now, again, if you imagine a serial killer, you imagine our Ted Bundys, our Jeffrey Dahmers, do you think the day that they went out to go and murder someone horribly, they had to sit there and summon up the courage to do it? They had to get help. They had to have something block up that remorse. Or do you think they were just like really loving murdering people, so they didn't need help? And I feel like this is really important when we look at what happens to Lady Macbeth throughout the play, because towards the end, obviously, we see it destroys her, doesn't it? It absolutely destroys her, what she does. And you see a complete turnaround from the beginning of the play when she is, you know, Charlie Big Bananas. She's strong. She knows what she's doing. Macbeth doesn't know. He needs to be bossed around. He's pathetic. He's weak. By the end of the play, she's broken, and Macbeth's actually kind of all right. Macbeth's handling it. He handles it very badly, but he's handling it in a very different way to how she does. So she has her very famous "Unsex Me Here" soliloquy. Now, the other thing to remember is sometimes people make the mistake of thinking because she wants to be unsexed, that suggests that she wants to be masculine. And I always argue, no, it doesn't. It means she doesn't want to be feminine, all right? And that is different, because what she wants is to remove all of those things that typically make you female. Because what comes with being a female stereotypically, what comes with that is being nurturing, being compassionate, being maternal, being a mother, being loving, and potentially being more caring than a man would be. Not to be too sort of stereotypical, but you've got to also think gender roles at the time would have been very different to what a sort of modern audience would imagine. So you would have had very strict, you know, roles for women to live up to. And you're looking at a time when women ultimately, if they were too outspoken, there were all sorts of sort of punishments that towns and villages full of people would inflict upon women that were too outspoken. They had something called a scold's bridle, which was around in the Elizabethan times, which was essentially like a cage they'd put over a lady's head, and then sort of it would press down on the tongue, and then they'd yank them around the village square to prove to everybody, like, this is what happens if a woman's too outspoken. So Lady Macbeth, she is a really interesting character because she's happy to take control. And also, when we meet her with Macbeth, Macbeth lets her. And that's the other interesting thing. He doesn't sort of go, hang on a minute, you can't talk to me like that. I'm the boss. I've just gone out and fought loads of people. I'm really good and strong. Actually, he sort of is quite weak and passive with her. And again, Shakespeare's created these characters to be potentially quite surprising. You don't expect it necessarily from a woman of the time. So she wants to be as unfeminine as possible. She wants anything that could make her feminine taken away from her. All right. And as I said, if you need that much help, my question may be, are you really that evil? You know, if you need that much help to be evil, it's not that natural, is it? Anyway, moving forward then, Macbeth comes home after she's had her sort of little soliloquy to herself where she's called those evil spirits to get her being as evil as possible. And he comes home and she sort of, you can see here that she is a master manipulator. She turns on the charm for him, you know, and they clearly have, obviously before the play sort of commences, you can imagine that you know, if they were real people, that they have a relationship that's close. They love each other. You know, she is his partner in greatness, as he calls her, and there's a closeness to him, and she's happy to see him, and they decide, you know, and it's sort of my love, and there's a real equality to a point between them, which again we may not expect if we are thinking about the time that this play was being written. So pretty much as soon as he comes home, she brings up the fact that Duncan's got to die. Okay, and if you read the play, obviously there's a little bit more to it than that. But she essentially does just decide, you know, okay, well, Duncan's got to die. He's never going to leave this castle. He's coming tonight and he won't leave again. He won't see tomorrow. And Macbeth, quite understandably, as he was on his own, is a bit like, okay, well, that isn't, you know, what do you mean? I don't really want to do that. And she essentially goes, no, it's fine. Leave it to me. All right, it's all going to be fine. You just need to leave this to me. You shall put tonight's business into my dispatch, right? She wants to be in charge of this situation. She wants to be the one to make it happen. And so she tells him to leave it to her. And again, there's lots of imperative language in this scene. There's lots of sort of her being in charge. She takes up the sort of the actual lines. If you read it as the script that it should be, she dominates the script. She is the one that sort of cuts him off, that speaks over him. And he is, as I said, he's quite passive. He's quite submissive to her, which could be surprising to the audience, okay? Now, we pretty much end that scene here. And the next scene, we go straight in to meeting Duncan. And he's arriving at the castle. Now, I think this is a really important scene. It's really short, one of the shortest scenes in the play, actually. It's really short, but it's really significant because I think Shakespeare puts this scene in to sort of doubly remind an audience of how lovely Duncan is and how trusting Duncan is, because it's almost comedically, he's almost sort of over the top with how grateful he is for everything and how beautiful it is there. And he sort of arrives and he talks about how the castle is in a really lovely environment and even the air smells good and it's gorgeous here and Banquo loves it and he loves it. And then Lady Macbeth comes out and she's, you know, playing this hostess. And remember, in the previous scene, she uses that very famous quote of, she tells Macbeth, look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. And deception really comes to the forefront of the sort of the themes of this play, because she is the most deceptive character in the sense that she can go from plotting the murder of this king to being like, Duncan, you're here. Oh my goodness, we couldn't do enough for you. And he again is all grateful and lovely because, you know, you can't believe how wonderful she is. And, you know, where's my wonderful Macbeth? Let's go find him. And they sort of go off together and go into the castle. And obviously at this point, you've got to think about audience reaction, right? Because the audience, again, dramatic irony, the audience know what is soon to happen to Duncan if Lady Macbeth gets her way. The audience knows what's coming. But Duncan has no idea. And I think the nicer Shakespeare makes Duncan, the more awful what Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are doing seems, because obviously the more you like someone, the less you want something bad to happen to them. So I think Shakespeare really labours to make sure we see Duncan as quite a vulnerable and lovely man, because it makes what happens to him all the more painful and all the more upsetting to watch and to sort of, you know, see happen. You want to stop it. You want to tell him, but obviously we can't. So he goes into the castle and that scene kind of ends and we're left with that real sense of tension because we know what's coming. Also bear in mind, you've got to think about the time again, the fact that at this time you would have had not just this fear of, oh, someone's going to get murdered, a king's going to get murdered, and the ramifications of this for society and the, you know, the consequences for the murderers and all sorts of things are, you know, and it's supposed to be tense. It's supposed to be scary because not only are you scared about the fact that a king might get murdered, but also what happens if they get caught and all sorts of things like that. Now, the next scene we go on to, and this is the last scene of Act 1, is Macbeth on his own, okay? And he has his first proper soliloquy in this scene. And it's a really, really good one because, again, do you remember I talked to you last video about the importance when it comes to Shakespeare and why I love him so much is because he creates these humans that don't just immediately know what they're going to do. Because who in life knows exactly what they're going to do all the time? How many times as a human have you gone, right, that sounds like a great idea, I'm going to do that, and then gone, what am I doing? This is a terrible idea, I shouldn't have done this. And ultimately, Macbeth was led along in scene 5 when he sees Lady Macbeth. He was led along to go, all right, well, I'll go along with this. She's told me to leave it to her. I'll just do what I'm told. But he's on his own now, and he's having a think, and he has a soliloquy which begins, if it were done when 'tis done, then 'twere well it were done quickly. Essentially, I want this over and done with if I've got to do it. That is not the words of someone like Lady Macbeth who's like, this is happening, can't wait, got to do it. He is very hesitant to do what needs to be done. And he essentially has a think to himself in this soliloquy about the kind of person Duncan is and the consequences of what would happen if he did it. And obviously, we can look in sort of from an analytical point at a later date. But overall, what he wants to say and what he's sort of worried about is that firstly, he's like, he's here in double trust, he says, okay, Duncan is here and he should be able to trust me for 2 reasons. He says, firstly, because I am his kinsman, I am his subject, all right? And therefore, you know, I should be strong against the deed of murder, right? But the other thing is, I'm his host and I should be against the murderer shutting the door. I should be protecting him because he's in my home. So you do see an element of guilt here. And there is a lot of guilt in Macbeth at the beginning of this play. He doesn't know if it's the right thing. He kind of knows it is the wrong thing, but he also kind of is manipulated. He wants it, and it's a lot for him to sort of think about. The other thing that he talks about here is that, as we kind of already know, Duncan is a really loved and respected king, and he talks about how Duncan's death is going to result in widespread lamentation across Scotland. You know, people are going to be devastated. People are going to, it's going to, tears will drown the wind because of how awful and grief-stricken everybody's going to be by the murder of this king. His virtues will plead trumpet-tongued. You know, he will go straight to heaven, but it will be a sad, sad day for Scotland. And he's aware of the ramifications there. He also talks about the fact that, you know, this is going to send me to hell, and is what I get out of it worth that? So there's a lot of toing and froing in this scene of what he really sort of thinks, what he thinks is the right thing to do. And he essentially talks himself out of it in this scene, okay? He talks himself out of it, and he, for a minute, tries to stand up to wifey, right? So she bowls back in. She's like, all right, what's going on? The king's looking for you. And he goes, we shall proceed no further in this business, right? Good for you, Macbeth. You're standing up to her. No, I don't want to kill the king. He's great. He loves me. And also he says, I've just been given this really sort of, you know, honourable title. I've been given this reward for being so good in my battle, and I've done this and that. And he says, you know, I should be wearing them in their newest gloss now. You know, I shouldn't be striking them off so soon. He's essentially comparing this new title he's got to, you know, if you get like a brand new pair of trainers or a brand new outfit, you're not going to sort of wear it for a couple of minutes and then go, nah, I can't bother with it anymore. You know, that first time you wear those new trainers or that new thing, you really, really love it, and you want to show it off, and you want to be proud of it, and you want to look after it. And what he's saying is, I don't want to cast it aside so soon, actually. I'm gonna hold on to this moment. I'm already being thought of highly. You know, he already loves me. Maybe I don't need to do this. Lady Macbeth ain't happy with that. She is not happy at all. So what Lady Macbeth does is she essentially thinks, okay, well, my original manipulation doesn't seem to be working, so I need to bring out the big guns. And so she starts to do some emotional blackmail. She starts to talk about, you know, what beast was it that made you break this enterprise to me? Were you drunk when you said it, and now are you hungover and you're sort of regretting it? She really goes at him about, you know, you've broken a promise to me. She also starts questioning his manhood, you know, and also she starts saying, well, when you were going to do it, that's when I realised that you loved me. Now I don't think you do love me. And also only a man, you know, a real man would do it for me. And obviously that's a weak spot for Macbeth, because the idea of masculinity, especially at the time, was very ingrained. Because nowadays, you can do a lot of different things and be a lot of different ways and still be seen as a man. You know, you can be a man if you stay at home and look after your children and be a good dad. You can be a man if you go to work. You can be a man if you do this, if you do that. Back then, you kind of were a man if you fought and if you were chivalrous and if you did all those things that are more stereotypically masculine. And so her questioning that manhood, I think, really, really gets to him. And he's really sort of like, I don't like that. And he says, no, I dare do all the things that make a man. Of course I do. And she's like, well, what's made you change your mind then? And she also starts to bring up this idea of promises and breaking promises. And her quite famous comparison, or sort of, you know, the way that she explains that, well, I would never break a promise, is she talks about, look, I know how tender it is to love the babe that milks me. I've breastfed. She talks about the fact that she's had a baby, she's breastfed. And she says, I know how wonderful it is to sort of have that baby looking up into my eyes and, you know, loving me and trusting me. And she's like, she says, I would, while it was still feeding, I'd pluck it from my nipple and I'd dash its brains out if I'd promised you that I would. If I'd made that promise, then I would do it. She uses this really shocking image. And the other thing about that image, of course, is it ties back in with this idea that she is rejecting any element of femininity that she has. Being a woman, that privilege of being able to make life and sustain life with your body. You know, she's already wanted to turn her milk to poison in the previous soliloquy. And now she's taking it one step further to say, no, I would literally, while that baby was completely helpless and dependent on me, no, I would murder it. So that absolute rejection of anything stereotypically female, you could argue Shakespeare's being pretty progressive with the character. You know, he's created a woman here that really isn't going by the rules. She's not playing by the rules at all. She's doing her thing, you know. And it essentially works because Macbeth starts to backtrack a little bit. And he starts to question, you know, well, okay. And he starts to sort of you can see that he's not quite saying we shall proceed no further in this business anymore. It's no longer this very strong, no way, I'm not doing this. It's now a little bit more along the lines of, well, what if we fail and I'm not sure about this? And you already see the power that this woman has over him, okay? And by the end of that scene, essentially, she has changed his mind again, yeah? She has essentially gone, well, this is what we're doing. And no, don't even think about changing your mind like you said you were going to. That's not going to happen. We are going to do this and you are going to kill the king. And by the end of the scene, I quite like the difference because you see from him sort of go, we shall proceed no further. He at one point says, and if we should fail, like, you know, as in, oh, I've given in, but what if we fail? And she's like, we're not going to fail. Screw your courage to the sticking point and we'll not fail, right? Something else that I think is fabulous. So essentially we finish that scene with him going, okay, I'm going to do it. So by the end of Act 1, Macbeth has agreed. He's going to do it. He's going to accept that he has to murder the king because essentially she's manipulated him into it again. But there's a moment in his soliloquy before she comes along and kind of ruins it all, where he is talking about why he wants to do this and what he wants out of it. And it's brilliant because he talks about the fact that he has no spur to prick the sides of his intent. He just has his vaulting ambition, which is actually something that he might end up sort of tripping over himself for. Now, what I love about this bit, and again, it's all about Shakespeare being this amazing playwright and remembering the form of this text being a play. All right, again, exam technique, we can talk about how you write at a later date, but we do have to remember that this is a play and it was written to be performed. And Shakespeare wrote this knowing that he wanted, obviously, you have to think about your entrances and exits. You have to think about your timings. Remember, not big on the stage directions is old Shakespeare, but if he does have one, it's significant. And what he does is he has, just as Macbeth is talking about having no spur to prick the sides of his intent. Now, obviously, in case you didn't know, because not everybody would, a spur, I don't know if you know any sort of what cowboys would look like, you know, the old school version of a cowboy. They would have on their boots the sort of little wheelie thing that's a bit sharp on the back, on the heel of their boots. And what that's used for is to dig into the sides of their horse when they're riding it to make it G up, to make it go quicker. And essentially what he's saying is he doesn't have a spur to prick the sides of his intent, the thing that he wants to do. All he has is his ambition. And at that exact moment, Lady Macbeth walks in and interrupts his soliloquy. So at that moment, what does that tell us about how Shakespeare is trying to present Lady Macbeth to be? What is she? She is his spur. She is the thing that's going to make it happen. She is the thing that's going to make him do it. And that's exactly what happens, isn't it? Because he's just talked himself out of it. He's just essentially said, I'm not going to do it. I don't feel comfortable. I don't want to do it. I've talked myself through all of the different ramifications. Duncan's a good guy. I should be making sure that he's safe and protected because he's in my home. And actually, I might be ambitious, but I don't have the thing that's going to make me do this. The other thing that I think is fascinating about this moment is if you remember what Lady Macbeth talks about at the beginning of Act 1, Scene 5, she talks about the fact that, yeah, he's ambitious, but he doesn't have what it takes to get this done. Now, say what you want about Lady Macbeth, she knows her husband, right? And quite often you see these moments where the dynamic between these two, yes, you could argue it's very toxic. Yes, you could argue that she is very domineering. But there is a knowledge of each other. There is an awareness of what the other person is like, what they need, what they don't need. And this is one of those moments in the sense that she said, you want it, but you're too nice to make it happen. What's he saying in this soliloquy, really? I want it, but I just don't have the thing that's going to force me to do it. And in comes Lady Macbeth. Here I am. I'm the thing that's going to make you do that. And it's not like she comments. She wasn't listening to this speech, but Shakespeare just drops her in at the exact right moment to show what kind of a person she is to him. Okay? And that's when he essentially is then given that spur because she steps in and makes it happen. So we've come to the end of the first act of the play. Now, if we think about for a minute the structure of this play, okay, we've got what's known quite commonly as the 5-act structure, all right? And we will talk about tragedies at a later date. But the thing that's important is we've got to think, I'm sure you've already done this, but you think about the sort of graph of tension, all right? And at the moment, Shakespeare is pushing our tension up slowly, 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 all the way, isn't he? Because we have Duncan in the setting now. We know he's there. We know that Macbeth has essentially now been talked into doing it. All the little pieces have been put into place. All of those things are now in the right area to create this perfect storm. And we know that Duncan's not even days, Duncan's hours are numbered. He's on his way out now, okay? And there's not a lot we can do about it. So the audience are just trapped watching this horrible event occur, watching Macbeth get more and more manipulated and knowing that it's going to happen. So I don't want to continue going on with the scene, the next act in this video, because I feel like it's probably a good place to stop. So all I will do by finishing is just talk about the use of this idea of tragedy, okay? Because we have to be aware, and I'm sure you are aware by this point, that this play is a tragedy. Macbeth, therefore, is a tragic hero. Now, what does a tragic hero actually mean? What is a tragic hero? We know that a tragic hero has to come from what they say high estate, okay? He has to start highly thought of, because that's why the downfall of the tragic hero is so tragic. He has to be someone that is almost relatable. We can understand the way they end up in the situation they're in. And if you think about the situation that Macbeth is in, we do understand that, don't we? Because he isn't someone that jumps straight into wanting to do this. He is somebody that hums and haws, thinks about it, gets manipulated, goes back on himself and wants it, but knows it's not the right thing. He does all that. We also can see that he has his tragic flaw of, call it what you want, ambition, susceptibility to manipulation, a greed for power, but he's going slowly to give into that. He's giving into it. He has that weakness. And everything he's done so far is leading horribly and inevitably towards what happens in Act 2. All right, so we do have this tragic hero character. We do have this idea of the tragedy. We do have the tension building. And all of those things we can come back to as we carry on with the play in our next video. So hopefully that's helped you with the last part of Act 1. And again, if you feel like that's helpful, then give it a like, see what we do next time. Okay, thank you.